Barron Trump attempted to challenge Representative Jasmine Crockett during a live broadcast, but what he received instead was a calm, pointed reality check that left him reconsidering everything. And yes, the cameras captured every second. The mood inside the auditorium wasn't tense, just charged, like everyone sensed something unexpected was coming, but no one knew from whom. When Barron Trump stepped up to the microphone, the crowd stirred. Not because of his last name, though. That always drew attention, but because of the confidence in his stance. Shoulders firm, voice clear. He came prepared, or so he thought. The town hall was airing live nationwide. A panel of lawmakers and young leaders filled the stage at the Gerald Ford Civic Center in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett sat third from the left. Her attire was crisp and her gaze sharp, the kind that sees through pretense. She didn't lean back, didn't offer a smile. She listened. Barron, 18 and recently graduated, had quickly become a rising figure. In conservative youth circles, his team had coached him thoroughly. Speak firmly, stay composed, finish strong. He cleared his throat, locked eyes with Crockett, and said, "Congresswoman Crockett, I've followed some of your legal work and public statements. Honestly, it's difficult to take certain individuals seriously when they turn outrage into a brand." The room shifted. Not with gasps, just the sudden hush that falls when everyone stops blinking. Crockett didn't move. Not even a blink. She offered no snap comeback, no theatrics. She simply tilted her head slightly, as if she'd heard it all before, just never from someone so young and confident. "Mr. Trump," she began, voice level. "It's always interesting that those most concerned about my tone rarely mention the reasons behind it." That's when the murmurs started, but she continued. Her words were direct, not to wound but to clarify. She spoke of the young girls she'd represented in court, those without PR teams, well-known surnames, or any kind of support system. She mentioned a 12-year-old client in Dallas, suspended for speaking back to a teacher, only for that teacher to later be caught mocking the student's dialect on tape. She explained, "What some label as outrage is, to her, a method of survival. You call it outrage. I call it using the tools available to protect those who don't have any. And standing where you are, the real question you should ask is why so many still need protection." Barron blinked. This wasn't the dialogue he'd rehearsed. He tried to jump in. "I'm just saying," but Crockett cut in, still calm. "No, you're not just saying, you're performing. And unfortunately for you, I don't hand out applause for weak scripts." There was no applause, no dramatic reaction. That would have lessened the weight of the moment. Instead, the audience sat silent, watching a young man with a famous name get quietly dismantled, not through insults, but through clarity, logic, and restraint. The clip spread quickly. Before the segment wrapped, it had already hit Twitter, TikTok, and countless group chats that thrive on political moments. The headlines were inevitable, but many missed the depth. This wasn't about humiliation or dominance. It was a lesson in what happens when someone used to authority enters a space where their name carries no special currency. Crockett didn't tear him down. She highlighted the weakness of his argument, all without raising her voice. That's what landed hardest. Her tone remained composed, her words exact. And somewhere during her reply, Barron's expression shifted, his brows furrowed, his mouth parted as if to respond. But he couldn't, because this wasn't a pundit across from him. It was a woman who'd spent her life in systems indifferent to status, fighting uphill battles without the spotlight. She didn't need to shout. She never did, but this moment wasn't born out of chance. It wasn't an accidental meeting in an airport lounge or a hallway backstage. This town hall had been planned for months. Titled Voices of Tomorrow, it was a national youth policy event designed to close the widening gap between Gen Z and the halls of power in Washington. It was designed to look fresh, feel urgent, and most importantly, draw attention. The producers at CN knew exactly what they were doing. They weren't just chasing headlines. They wanted something raw, something that felt unfiltered. So they crafted a setup they believed would spark tension, a panel of high-profile lawmakers, paired with carefully chosen Gen Z speakers ready to challenge them. That's how Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett got involved. Direct, outspoken, sharp, a former public defender from Texas turned lawmaker, Crockett built her reputation by refusing to play it safe. Her boldness won her loyal supporters, and just as many critics who disliked her for the very same reason. Then came Barron Trump. His invitation stirred controversy from the start. He wasn't a politician. He hadn't even started college, but ever since turning 18, he'd been making the media rounds, appearing on podcasts, live streams, and speaking at conservative youth events. Behind the scenes, some producers saw his inclusion as a gamble. Others saw his last name as a guaranteed audience magnet. The idea was simple: present him as a rising voice of young conservatism. He agreed, reportedly against the advice of some family members. They reminded him that policy forums weren't campaign rallies. But Barron felt ready, perhaps too ready. He'd grown up in rooms where people often nodded in agreement before he even finished a thought. This forum wasn't going to be like that. Held in Grand Rapids. The event wasn't confined to Michigan. Questions covered a broad range from climate change and digital privacy to free speech and criminal justice reform. 4 lawmakers sat on stage, each fielding pointed questions from the youth panel. Crockett took the most heat early on and made it clear she wasn't dodging any of it. Barron's turn came midway through the program. But before that, he was already setting the stage, jotting notes, whispering to a handler behind him, occasionally glancing at the camera between exchanges. Anyone paying attention could tell he had something planned. Sitting next to him was Elijah Marino, a 19-year-old student organizer from Fresno. During a commercial break, Elijah leaned in, urging Barron to ease up and let the conversation flow naturally. Barron brushed him off. "I got this," he said. The cameras missed it, but some in the audience later confirmed it happened. Meanwhile, Crockett remained focused and composed. When asked about the strain between police unions and reform advocates, she didn't sugarcoat her answer. She spoke about union contracts and civilian oversight boards. She wasn't performing for the cameras. She stuck to the facts. Barron had been observing, waiting. He wasn't brought in to stir things up, but that's what he chose to do. Whether it was pride, pressure, or showmanship, no one can say for sure. But when he finally grabbed the mic and turned to Crockett, it wasn't a question, it was a speech. It was short, but clearly designed to provoke. He pointed to her history of public outrage, suggested she was more noise than action, and questioned how her courtroom experience translated to real legislative work. None of it was subtle. It was packaged for social media, quick, cutting, and camera-ready. There were no boos. But something in the room shifted. Crockett didn't flinch. She stayed still, face unreadable, and waited. And in that pause, something revealing happened. To viewers at home, it became obvious. This wasn't an exchange between equals. It was a young man swinging with the weight of his father's legacy. Behind him, facing a woman who had been through too many real battles to be shaken. What came next wasn't a rebuttal. It was a calculation. Barron knew the spotlight was his. The cameras were already closing in. The moderator gave a subtle cue. Barron adjusted his sleeve, just like his father had done countless times, and stepped forward. He didn't stumble. His voice was steady, almost rehearsed, and maybe it was because from the first words, it sounded less like a question and more like a monologue crafted for virality. "Congresswoman Crockett," he began, "I've studied your record, your legal work, and your time in Congress, but isn't there a difference between fighting for justice and being addicted to conflict? Sometimes it seems like you're more focused on being loud than being right." He let the words linger. That was the moment his team likely aimed for. The clip made to circulate in conservative media. The words themselves weren't novel, but the delivery, the smirk, the stance, the slow blink made it clear he thought he'd just scored a win, except he hadn't. Crockett didn't react right away. She didn't lean back or grab the mic like it was a TV debate. She just looked at him. Really looked. And if you were there, you could feel it. Not anger, not embarrassment, something heavier. Disappointment. It was the kind of look a teacher gives a student who decided to show off instead of show up. Prepared. She leaned in slightly. "Barron," she began. No title, no pleasantries, just his name. The issue with speaking before you've experienced life. She said, is that you often mistake volume for vision? That was it, no yelling, no insults, just truth, delivered? Like a lesson. He tried to jump in, hoping to catch her off balance, but she wasn't finished. You think this is about being loud? She asked, voice calm and eyes steady. I used to practice law, she continued. I sat across from judges who told black girls they were too emotional when they cried after being assaulted. I've been in courtrooms where silence was used. Not as a tool for peace, but to deny justice. So no, I don't quiet down just to make others comfortable. He didn't respond, at least not yet. So she kept speaking. You've grown up in a world that gives you the benefit of the doubt before you even speak. Most of the people I stand up for never get the chance to be heard. So when you label it outrage, what I hear is, you're making me uncomfortable by refusing to disappear, and I won't disappear. Somewhere in the crowd, someone let out a low, thoughtful hum. Not mocking, not sarcastic, just one of those instinctive sounds people make when truth strikes a chord. Barron stood motionless. He hadn't prepared for this. His talking points were rehearsed, but they lacked depth. He looked toward the moderator, uncertain whether to respond, step back, or just remain silent. The moderator didn't intervene. I respect your stance, Barron said at last, his tone a bit more rigid, but I still believe tone matters in public service. That's when Crockett delivered the line that would be replayed again and again in the days to come. You care about tone, she said evenly, because you've never had to fight for content. No yelling, no dramatic gestures, just a steady, piercing rhythm, the kind of delivery that cuts through politics and lands deep inside you. In that moment, it wasn't just about him anymore. It was about every person watching who had ever been told they were too angry, too loud, too intense when all they really were was tired of being overlooked. But as sharp as that exchange was, what truly shifted the energy in the room came next. She didn't fidget. She didn't shift in her chair. Barron's jaw tightened slightly, his fingers tapping quietly on the side of the microphone. Crockett remained steady, grounded. Her voice carried weight not because it was raised, but because it didn't try to impress. She wasn't performing. She was describing a life he hadn't lived. Tone, she repeated softly, as if to correct the word itself, didn't get me through law school while I worked night shifts. Tone didn't help me sit beside parents who had just lost their child in a police stop, and tone certainly didn't keep me composed when a DA claimed a teenage girl was acting grown just because she wore lip gloss to school. Her hands moved subtly, one resting on the table, the other drawing a quiet arc in the air. Not for drama, but for purpose. Tone is what people cling to when they want to avoid addressing what really matters. I'm not here to sound polite. I'm here to speak the truth. Barron didn't interrupt, whether it was out of respect, unease, or strategy. It was unclear, but something had shifted. He wasn't leaning in anymore. He stayed alert, almost like he was waiting for permission to breathe. Crockett continued, now speaking to the audience more than to Barron, we've reached a point where young voices are, they were welcome in the room, but only if they stayed agreeable, smiled politely and gratefully accepted. Crumbs, that wasn't dialogue. It was performance. A few students sitting near the back exchanged glances, not because they disagreed, but because they recognized themselves in her words. They had lived that balancing act. Being heard required being cautious, careful, and easy. To digest, I want young people to speak up, Crockett said. Challenge me. But don't show up with rehearsed punches and expect me to flinch. You don't step into the ring and expect your last name to do the fighting. She paused, then turned back to Barron, not with aggression, but with clarity. I've buried friends because of broken systems. You've been profiled in magazines for being tall. The line didn't get applause. It drew silence, the kind that means people are really listening. Even then, her voice stayed calm. Her words were steady, personal, unshaken. Her body language showed full control. Every gesture strengthened the message. Every pause gave it room to sink in. Barron finally spoke. I think I see your point, he said, though his words felt caught somewhere between acknowledgement and retreat. Crockett gave a small smile. Not smug, not dismissive, just a knowing smile, like she'd heard just enough to recognize a shift, however slight. You don't have to agree with me, she sighed, her tone softening. But if you're going to be here truly present, bring something real, not something memorized. At that point, even those who came in with biases began to reconsider. This wasn't about left or right anymore, not about party loyalty or family names. It was about who had lived the weight of their words and who was borrowing theirs. Barron stood quietly. For the first time that night, he looked less like a speaker and more like someone still learning. And Jasmine, she didn't gloat, she didn't seek applause. She simply folded her hands on the table and waited for the next question. But something else had settled into the air, something bigger than that. Moment. It wasn't about how loud her voice was. It was about how deeply her memory spoke. The moderator moved the discussion back to the panel, but the room didn't go back to normal. The crowd wasn't loud, they were locked in. Leaning forward, eyes darting between Crockett and Barron like a match with no predictable outcome. That's when Crockett, without being prompted, began to share her background. I wasn't always in Congress, she said. Still composed, I didn't grow up with a network or a platform. I spent 12 years representing people nobody wanted to hear from. The room hushed again. She shared the story of Marcus Bellamy, an 8th grader, suspended and charged after resisting when a school officer grabbed his backpack. They said he was being aggressive, she explained. But all he wanted was to keep his notebook. What was inside it? Drawings, anime, a doodle of Sonic the Hedgehog. She didn't rush. She let the story settle. The system didn't care about context. He was labeled, processed, and made to feel disposable at 13. His mother worked 2 jobs and slept in her car just to attend his hearings. You want to talk about outrage? She asked. Try whispering your way through that. No one interrupted. Not the moderator, not Barron, not the staffers by the camera. It wasn't a speech anymore. It was something deeper. There's this idea, she continued, that black women in politics are too emotional, too blunt, that we're aggressive or putting on a show. But try surviving in rooms that weren't built for you, where calm gets you ignored and being direct gets you labeled. Then tell me how much tone matters. She turned again, just slightly, toward Barron, not to trap him, but to face him. You came in with a plan. Thought provoking me would prove your point. But you didn't expect the discipline it takes to hold fire without burning the whole place down. Barron visibly swallowed. No clever retorts. No smugness. Just stillness, the stillness of someone. Realizing he'd brought a water pistol to a forest fire, Crockett leaned in again just a bit. You want to lead? Then ask better questions, not the kind that get you likes, the kind that keep you up at night. Ask who you're willing to lose votes for, what you're willing to risk your career for, and if your answer is nothing, then you're not ready. That line stuck. Even the older attendees, congressional aides, invited guests, retired educators shifted in their seats because this wasn't a takedown. It wasn't revenge. It was mentorship, raw and unpolished, and it wasn't just directed at Barron. I say this to every young person watching, she said. Not just the ones with well-known last names. Don't waste your voice trying to sound important. Use it to say something important. Then she sat back and let the silence linger. The moderator looked stunned, not because he disagreed, but because moments like this don't usually happen, not live on air. Not with graphics prepped and commercials lined up, but no one dared cut to a break. Barron adjusted his mic. He looked down, then back up. I didn't mean any disrespect, he said, his voice quieter. I thought I was prepared. I see now I missed something. Crockett didn't gloat, but she didn't soften too much either. Then take that, she said, and grow. The mic doesn't make you right, listening might. By the time the next panelist began to speak, the internet had already made up its mind about whose voice truly resonated, even in a whisper. You could feel it. The tone had shifted, not just between them, but across the whole room. What began as a tightly controlled forum had cracked open into something raw and real. And Barron Trump, standing at the center, was no longer performing. He was absorbent. The tension hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed. Crockett's words didn't just hit, they stayed. Her stories weren't abstract points. They were grounded in people, in memories. In systems with names, paperwork, and Pain. There was no way to counter that with statistics or a rehearsed reply. This wasn't a debate. It was real experience standing face to face with assumption. Barron's posture had shifted. He still sat upright, still composed, but the sharpness was gone. The tension in his shoulders had eased. The cocky spark in his eyes gone. In its place was something more cautious, something unfamiliar to those watching. Humility, the moderator, tried to move things along, transitioning to a question on digital privacy laws, but the focus in the room had scattered. Even the panelists found it hard to pivot. The weight of what had just occurred wasn't easy to brush aside. On social media, clips had already begun to spread, not the loud or flashy moments, but the quiet ones, the pauses. Crockett's words. "The mic doesn't make you right?" Barron's reply. "I see I missed something." These small exchanges were resonating because they felt rare, truth, breaking through the usual format. Backstage, a producer whispered into the moderator's earpiece. They were over time, but no one wanted to cut away. The story had changed. Ending now would be like leaving in the middle of a personal revelation. When the moderator finally returned to Barron, he was careful. "Would you like to respond to what the Congresswoman said earlier?" Barron paused. Even that was noteworthy. Just minutes earlier, he had arrived with the goal of owning the room. "I think I came here trying to sound smart," he said slowly, "but maybe I should have come here to ask better questions." There was no applause, just silence, respectful, curious. Crockett didn't add anything. She didn't have to. The message had landed. And everyone knew it. This wasn't about politics anymore. Something deeper had shifted, something beyond party lines. It had become a moment about maturity, about what happens in the camera's role, and you realize the real test in winning the argument. But learning something in front of others, that's what struck people most. It wasn't that Crockett had won. It was that she had revealed something many recognized but rarely saw on a stage like this. That confidence isn't the same as wisdom. That volume doesn't equal truth, and that having a platform doesn't mean you're ready to use it. For Barron, this was a turning point. Whether he fully understood it or not, something inside him shifted. You could see it in how he looked at her now, not with scorn or irritation, but with thoughtfulness, maybe even curiosity. It didn't make him the villain. It made him human. And perhaps, for the first time that evening, he saw her as human too, not just a voice from the opposite side, but as someone whose words came with real experience behind them. The panel continued. More questions, more policy back and forth, but the moment between them lingered. The energy in the room had changed. Toward the back, Elijah Marino, the young organizer who had earlier tried to warn Barron, leaned over and said softly, "That's what real leadership looks like, man, when you sit with what you didn't expect." Barron didn't answer. He just gave a small nod, not to the audience, not to the cameras, but to himself. And yet, the most surprising part of the story didn't happen on stage. It happened in the hours that followed. The forum ended quietly. No dramatic scenes, no confrontations, just a polite wrap-up. The moderator thanked the panel. The cameras swept across the stage, and the credits began to roll. But outside the Civic Center in Grand Rapids, the real impact had just begun. Within an hour, clips began circulating, first on X, then TikTok, then on YouTube channels designed for moments like this. But this time, it wasn't partisan outrage or distorted sound bites. People were genuinely stopping mid-scroll to watch Crockett's full response. The nuance. The calm, the way she taught without lecturing. Even those who didn't usually agree with her were commenting, "I don't vote her way. She handled it with grace." This is what true accountability looks like on both sides. Say what you want about Barron, but the kid didn't walk out. He stayed put and listened. By the next morning, Crockett's office inbox was flooded, not with media requests, those came later, but with messages from teachers, students, and working moms. People said they saw themselves in her story. Some shared memories of their first jobs in courtrooms. Others talked about their children navigating the same school systems she mentioned. None of it felt like a performance. It was personal. Barron trended too, but for different reasons. As expected, not all the attention was kind. That's just the internet. There were jokes, memes, and side-by-side comparisons of his expression before and after Crockett's response, but something else came through, something more surprising: respect. Not for what he said at first, but for how he responded afterward, for staying in his seat, for listening, for trying to adjust in real time without storming off, interrupting, or pretending nothing happened. That night, he posted a short video, just a quick vertical clip from his phone. No music, no filters, no extra lighting. "Last night I tried to make a point and ended up learning a better one," he said, looking into the camera. "You don't have to agree with someone to learn from them. And I learned something. Thank you, Congresswoman Crockett." It wasn't groundbreaking, but it meant something. Crockett didn't repost it or make a public comment. But the next day, her team released a statement that said a lot without over-explaining. "Public spaces work best when we all come willing to listen." That includes everyone. Behind the scenes, their staff had already exchanged emails, not to schedule interviews, but to reconnect in private, away from the spotlight. They even discussed organizing a youth-led roundtable in Dallas later that summer. That part caught everyone off guard, because usually viral political moments fade fast, but this one lingered. It stayed thoughtful. It made people reflect instead of just cheer. The moment was later picked up by 3 major Sunday news shows. Each aired a slightly different version, but it wasn't just the sharp one-liners that got attention, it was the context. The way Crockett delivered her words, the shift in Barron's body language, the look on his face when she said, "You confuse volume with vision." High school government teachers began assigning the exchange as a discussion topic. One college debate coach tweeted, "I've coached national champions, and I've never seen a takedown more respectful, more precise, or more instructive than what Jasmine Crockett delivered last night." And within all the noise, a quieter truth emerged. We've forgotten how powerful it can be when people show up expecting a fight, and leave with a lesson. Beyond the viral moments and trending tags, something deeper had taken root. And that's what mattered most. For many, it was just another clip. Something they watched during a commute or over lunch. Maybe they sent it to a friend with a laughing emoji or a single-word reaction, but for a few, it resonated more deeply, because what unfolded on that stage wasn't just a generational clash, or a political spat, or 2 public figures going head-to-head. It was something rarer, real-time growth. What Jasmine Crockett offered that night wasn't only a rebuttal. It was a guide. She showed what it means to stand firmly in lived experience when met with privilege, masked as performance. More importantly, she reminded viewers what true composure looks like when it's driven by truth, not pride. She didn't try to humiliate Barron. He walked in hoping to score a viral moment, something worth reposting, something to fuel the talk circuit. But what he got was something unexpected, an on-air moment that forced him to face himself. It showed that confidence without real depth collapses quickly. That's what stayed with people. We've all seen others double down, get louder, blame the editing, or storm off. But how often do we see someone, especially someone that young, pause, reflect, and admit they missed something? For Barron, this could have been a major misstep. Yet somehow, by not pretending, by sitting with the discomfort instead of spinning, he turned that silence into something meaningful, something deeply human. Not everyone gets that kind of moment. Even fewer recognize it when it arrives. And for Crockett, this wasn't a gotcha moment. You could tell from her demeanor, no smirks, no gloating, no viral rants, just a steady sense of clarity. She'd been through enough to know that the best lessons don't always leave bruises. They change how people think. That's what real leadership looks like, whether it's in a tailored suit or a hoodie. This wasn't about politics anymore. It was about presence. It was about what happens when someone shows up with their full story and doesn't shy away when it's challenged. It was about what happens when someone who expects to take control realizes they're out of their depth and chooses honesty over pretending. Naturally, the media tried to shape the narrative. Some framed it as a takedown, others as a clash of generations, but those takes missed the essence. This wasn't a battle. It was one of those rare public moments where everyone walked away a little better. There's something powerful about Seeing two people from completely different backgrounds, values, and life paths share a moment that wasn't rehearsed or politically perfect, but real. One spoke from experience. The other listened. Maybe that's the lesson. It's okay to enter a room thinking you know more than you do, as long as you're willing to leave it a bit quieter, a bit wiser. One conversation won't solve everything. It won't heal divisions, rewrite policies, or undo years of distrust. But it can start something, a question, a shift, a seed. In a time when most conversations feel like competitions, this one felt like something we rarely see. Two people actually hearing each other. Even if only briefly. So maybe next time someone walks into a room ready to win, they'll pause and ask themselves what they're really there for. What happened that night in Grand Rapids wasn't dramatic, no shouting, no exits, no big emotional scenes, and maybe that's exactly why it mattered. It didn't rely on drama, it had truth. It had two people, one shaped by years of lived experience, the other still figuring his out. And a room full of people who witnessed something change, right there, not through anger or sound bites, but through an honest conversation that broke something open. And here's the truth. We don't get many of these moments anymore. Most of what we see, especially in politics, is just noise. People interrupting, posturing, trying to be louder. But this wasn't that. This was someone standing in the truth of what they've lived through, and someone else realizing that experience shapes how people speak. You could hear the weight in Crockett's voice, not because she raised it, but because she didn't need to. She brought facts, real cases, names, courtroom stories, things you can't fit into slogans. And you could see Barron trying not to win, but to understand. That moment, him slowing down, staying present, that's when the shift happened. This wasn't about casting heroes or villains. It was about that pause when a young man raised in privilege faced someone who had to fight for every space. She stood in and realized he had more to learn. That pause, that breath meant more than any viral clip. Because growth happens there, in that space between being certain and being humbled. Maybe that's the real lesson. We're not supposed to win every conversation. Sometimes we need to let go of a little pride to gain some clarity. Sometimes the best use of a microphone is to admit you were wrong, and maybe that's where true leadership begins. Not with a big speech or a famous name, but with the choice to listen when you'd rather argue, to stay seated when your ego tells you to leave, to say I missed something and truly mean it. Jasmine Crockett showed us that strength doesn't always come from volume. And surprisingly, Barron Trump showed that listening, really listening, is its own kind of bravery, especially under the spotlight. That town hall didn't change the world in a day, but it gave us a glimpse of what's possible when we enter. Conversations open to being changed, not just heard, and that's something worth remembering. So ask yourself, when was the last time you truly listened? Not to reply, but to learn. When did you last sit with your discomfort long enough to hear what it had to teach you? Think about that. And if this story made you pause even a little, don't stop here. Share it, discuss it, ask better questions. Listen with more intent. And above all, remember this. You don't have to win the room to leave a mark on it. You just need to bring something real. If this resonated with you, subscribe for more. We share stories that stay with you because often it's the quietest moments that speak the loudest.